Be me, Finnegan. Just a regular guy. Work as a software engineer. The job isn't exciting. It doesn't make for good stories at parties. It's just lines of code, debugging, and drinking coffee that's always a little too burnt. But it pays the bills. And the work is logical. Things either work or they don't. A bug is a bug. There's no opinion, just facts. I like that about it. The office was the same way. A quiet, professional place. We had a decent team, maybe 20 of us in the department. A mix of men and women, younger guys and older veterans. Everything was functional. People were polite. We collaborated on projects. And the most drama we ever had was arguing over which framework to use for a new build. My closest work friend was Rick. Rick's been at the company since the Stone Age. He's seen it all, and his default setting is a kind of weary cynicism. He's a good engineer, probably the best one we have, but he'd long since given up on climbing the corporate ladder. He just wanted to do his 8 hours, collect his paycheck, and go home to his workshop. The social dynamic was easy. We'd joke around the coffee machine, guys and girls together. Nobody was walking on eggshells. If a female colleague asked for an opinion on a piece of code, you gave her an honest opinion. If you saw someone struggling to carry a stack of server drives, you offered to help, regardless of who they were. It was just a normal workplace. We were colleagues. That all changed sometime in the spring. Our old HR manager, a pleasant lady who mostly just handled payroll and benefits, retired. For a couple of weeks, we had no HR on site. It was peaceful. Then our department head, Gunnar, sent out a company-wide email. Team, please join me in offering a warm welcome to our new head of human resources, Ada. The email had a picture of her. She was smiling, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It also had a short bio she wrote herself. Talked about her passion for creating inclusive and equitable workspaces. Mentioned her dedication to amplifying marginalized voices and dismantling systemic workplace biases. I read the words, and they just seemed like the usual corporate jargon, empty phrases that don't really mean anything. I glanced over at Rick's desk. He was staring at his monitor, not moving. He slowly turned his head to look at me, a completely deadpan expression on his face. He just slightly shook his head, once, then turned back to his screen. That was it. But I knew exactly what he meant. The next day, Ada did a walkthrough of the office. Gunnar was with her, pointing things out, laughing a little too loudly at things that weren't funny. She wasn't looking at the office equipment or the layout. She was looking at us. She had this intense, analytical gaze, like an auditor looking for fraud. Her smile was fixed in place, but her eyes were scanning everything. Who was talking to whom? How people were sitting. It was unsettling. The first official communication from her arrived that afternoon. An email with the subject line, "A new chapter for our company culture." It was a long manifesto about her vision. She wrote about the importance of making everyone, especially women, feel psychologically safe at work. The email said that in the coming weeks, she would be implementing new policies and mandatory training sessions to address unconscious bias and toxic masculinity. I had to read that phrase twice. Toxic masculinity. In our quiet little office of nerds, the place where the most aggressive thing that happened was someone microwaving fish in the break room. Rick came over to my desk, holding his coffee mug. He just pointed at my screen with his chin. "You read the gospel?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah, seems a bit much." "A bit much?" he scoffed quietly. "Finnegan, that's the declaration of war. You just don't know you're a soldier yet." I thought he was being overly dramatic. I was wrong. The mandatory training was scheduled for the following week. The email invitation specified that attendance was compulsory for all male-identifying employees. We all filed into the main conference room, about 15 of us. Ada was standing at the front. next to a projector screen. She was beaming. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice full of energy. "Today, we're going to have an open and honest conversation about how we, as men, can be better allies to our female colleagues." We were not, in fact, going to have a conversation. We were going to be lectured. For the next hour, she clicked through a PowerPoint presentation. It was a masterclass in bizarre accusations. She explained the concept of mansplaining, where a man explains something to a woman in a condescending manner. The example she used was a male doctor explaining a medical condition to a female doctor. It seemed completely divorced from our reality. Then she talked about manterrupting, which was apparently when a man interrupts a woman. She said studies showed it happened all the time in meetings. I looked around the room. Most of the guys just had this blank, stoic expression. They were just trying to survive the hour. Gunnar was in the front row, nodding at every point Ada made, occasionally making sounds of agreement. The weirdest part was the section on subtle workplace aggressions. She put up a slide with a picture of a man holding a door open for a woman. She explained that this act, while seeming polite, was actually a microaggression. It supposedly reinforced the idea that women are weak and incapable of opening their own doors. Another example was offering to help a female colleague carry something heavy. According to Ada, this was another microaggression. It implied a patronizing assumption of female fragility. We were just supposed to watch them struggle, I guess. The final slide was about unsolicited compliments. She said that complimenting a female colleague on her appearance, her hair, her clothes, was a form of objectification. It reduced her worth from a professional colleague to an object of aesthetic appraisal. At the end, she asked if there were any questions. The silence in that room was absolute. Nobody moved a muscle. Nobody wanted to be the guy who asked a problematic question and ended up on her radar. Ada's smile faltered for a second, then returned. "Great. I'm glad we're all on the same page. This is just the first step in building a better, safer workplace for everyone." We filed out of the room in silence. The atmosphere in the office was immediately different. It was like a chill had set in. The easy banter was gone. Men and women still talked, but only about work and in a very formal, stilted way. The following Monday, Ada announced her next big initiative, an anonymous reporting system. She sent an email explaining that any employee could now submit a confidential complaint about any colleague's behavior through a special portal on the company's intranet. She guaranteed that the identity of the complainant would be protected. The goal, she wrote, was to empower those who feel unable to speak up. Rick called it the Stasi hotline. It didn't take long for it to be used. The first victim was a guy from the networking team. Let's call him Mark. Mark is a cheerful, loud guy, one of those people who just has a booming laugh. He's harmless. One afternoon, he was telling a couple of us a funny story about his kid. He got to the punchline and let out his usual big laugh. The next day, he got called into a meeting with Gunnar and Ada. He came back to his desk about 30 minutes later, looking like he'd seen a ghost. He told us what happened. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint. It said his aggressive and overly loud male laughter was creating an intimidating and hostile work environment, reminiscent of a locker room. He tried to explain it was just his laugh, that he's always been that way. Ada told him that intent is not as important as impact. The impact was that a colleague felt unsafe. He was given a formal verbal warning, which was documented in his employee file. After that, Mark barely spoke above a whisper. The laughter in our department died completely. The fear was palpable now. Everyone knew that any little thing, any off-the-cuff remark, any gesture, could be misinterpreted and reported. And with the system being anonymous, you'd never even know who your accuser was. You couldn't defend yourself against a shadow. The second incident happened a week or so later. It involved one of our senior engineers, a really sharp guy who's been with the company for a decade. He was in a technical meeting, debating a database issue with a female engineer. They had different opinions on the best approach. The discussion got a little heated, as technical debates sometimes do. At one point, he said something like, "Look, let's just be rational about this for a second and examine the performance metrics." That was it. The next morning, he was in a meeting with Ada and Gunnar. An anonymous complaint had been filed. He was accused of gaslighting his female colleague by telling her to be rational, which implied she was being emotional and hysterical. He was also accused of using a dismissive and condescending tone. He was in complete shock. He said he was just trying to solve a technical problem. Ada gave him the intent versus impact speech again. He received a written warning. He was told if another complaint of this nature was filed against him, further disciplinary action would be taken. This sent a shockwave through the department. The effect was immediate and devastating. In meetings, if a female colleague proposed an idea, no matter how flawed, the male engineers would just nod and agree. Nobody wanted to be the next guy accused of gaslighting for having a technical disagreement. The quality of our work started to suffer. Collaboration, which is the lifeblood of software development, was dead. We were just a collection of individuals, terrified of interacting with each other. The social landscape of the office completely fractured. The lunch table, which used to be a big mixed group, split apart. The women sat at one end, the men at the other, or men just started eating at their desks. You'd see a female colleague at the coffee machine, and you'd just turn around and walk away, deciding you didn't need coffee that badly. It wasn't out of malice. It was self-preservation. Every interaction was a potential risk. The safest move was to have no interaction at all. I remember one afternoon, I was walking to a meeting. One of the female project managers was standing by the conference room, trying to get the projector to work. She was struggling with the cables. My first instinct, the human instinct, was to walk over and say, "Hey, need a hand with that?" But then Ada's voice popped into my head. The training session. Patronizing assumption of female fragility. Was offering help a microaggression? Would she appreciate the help, or would she file a complaint that I was implying she was incompetent? I couldn't know. The risk was too high. So I just stood there awkwardly for a moment, then walked into the room and sat down, pretending I hadn't seen anything. She eventually got it working herself, but I felt terrible. Not for her, but for the situation. This is what it had come to. Basic human decency was now a fireable offense. I saw Rick later that day. He looked more tired than usual. "How are you holding up in the new utopia?" I asked him. He took a long sip of his coffee. "I've just deleted a decade's worth of email," he said, "and I've stopped making eye contact with anyone. I'm a ghost. It's safer that way." He was right. We were all becoming ghosts. The final straw for me came about a month into Ada's reign of terror. I was working on a project with a female developer. We were sharing a screen, debugging a tricky piece of code. To point something out on the monitor, I leaned in, and my arm brushed against her shoulder for a fraction of a second. It was completely accidental, a total non-event. I immediately said, "Oh, sorry about that." She said, "No problem." And we continued working. But for the next 3 days, I was in a cold sweat. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that tiny, insignificant moment in my head. What if she thought it wasn't an accident? What if she didn't say anything at the time but was uncomfortable? What if she went to the anonymous portal and filed a complaint for unwanted physical contact? My career could be over, my reputation destroyed, all because my arm brushed against someone's shoulder for half a second. The accusation alone would be enough to ruin me. In this new world Ada had created, you were guilty until proven innocent, and proving your innocence was impossible. Nothing happened, thankfully. She was a normal person, and clearly didn't care. But the experience changed something in me. I couldn't live and work with that kind of constant low-level dread hanging over my head. It was insane. We were being treated like potential criminals at every moment of the day. We were expected to perform a job that requires intense focus and collaboration, but in an environment designed to maximize paranoia and social anxiety. That evening, I stayed late. The office was quiet. I went over to Rick's desk. He was still there, hammering away at some code. I sat down in the chair next to his desk. "Rick, I can't do this anymore." He stopped typing, but didn't look at me. He just stared at his screen. "I feel like I'm going crazy. I'm analyzing every word I say, every move I make. I'm terrified of being in a room alone with a female colleague." He finally turned to me. "And so you should be," he said, his voice flat. "That's the point. The system is working as designed." "But it's not right," I said. "We haven't done anything wrong. Why are we being treated like this?" Rick leaned back in his chair and sighed. It was the sound of a man who had been tired for a very long time. "Because the game is rigged, Finnegan. It's not about safety. It's about power. She's created a system where accusation equals guilt. There's no due process. There's no evidence. There are only feelings and impacts." "So what do we do?" I asked. "Just quit? Let her win?" "Quitting is what they expect," he said. "They replace you with someone more compliant. No, you don't quit." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You don't fight the system on their terms. You don't argue about feelings. You change the game. You force it onto a battlefield they can't control." "What battlefield is that?" He tapped his temple. "Logic, facts, hard evidence. The one thing her entire worldview is allergic to." He continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Her power comes from the ambiguity of it all, the he said, she said nature of these complaints, the anonymity. She thrives in the dark. So you drag it all into the light." I was listening, trying to understand what he was getting at. "She wants to talk about safety?" he said, a grim smile forming on his face. "Fine. Let's make this the safest, most documented, most transparent workplace in the history of mankind. Let's give her exactly what she's asking for." He was looking at me, waiting for me to get it. And then the idea started to form in my mind, a system that doesn't rely on feelings or interpretations, a system that just records reality. The only way to fight a system based on subjective claims is with a system based on objective truth, an unblinking, impartial witness. I knew exactly what we had to do. The next morning, I came in early. I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. I spent over an hour crafting the email. I wrote it, deleted it, and wrote it again. Every word had to be perfect. No emotion, no anger, just cold, corporate logic. It had to be a request, not a demand. It had to be framed as a supportive measure for Ada's own stated goals. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate speak. The subject line was, "Proposal for Enhancing Workplace Safety and Accountability." I started by praising the new initiatives to create a safer environment. I stated that we, the undersigned, were fully supportive of these goals. Then I introduced the core idea. I wrote that in the spirit of complete transparency and to protect all employees from misunderstandings or false allegations, we proposed the installation of a comprehensive video recording system in the common areas of the office. I listed the benefits. It would provide an objective record in case of disputes. It would deter any genuinely inappropriate behavior, and it would ensure that all interactions were documented, protecting both the accuser and the accused. I was very careful with the wording. I used phrases like mutual assurance, objective arbitration, and a commitment to factual evidence. I ended the email by stating that this measure would be the ultimate tool in guaranteeing the psychological safety that Ada herself had championed. I read it over one last time. It was perfect. There was nothing in it she could reasonably object to, without contradicting her entire platform. I put Gunnar in the to field and Ada in CC. I hit send before I could lose my nerve. For about 2 hours, there was silence. Then I got a meeting invitation from Gunnar. Title, Quick Chat. Location, his office. Time, 10 minutes from now. I knew this was it. I walked over to his office. The door was ajar. I could hear Ada's voice inside, sharp and angry. I knocked. Gunnar's strained voice told me to come in. I opened the door. Gunnar was sitting behind his desk, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Ada was pacing in front of his desk, her arms crossed tightly. She had my email open on her phone. She looked at me, and her eyes were blazing. "Sit down, Finnegan," Gunnar said, gesturing to a chair. I sat. Ada stopped pacing and stood right in front of me. "I want you to explain this email," she said, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "I think it's self-explanatory," I replied calmly. "It's a proposal to improve workplace safety." "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "This is a targeted, passive-aggressive attack on my policies." "It's the opposite," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's an attempt to support them. Your system relies on reports of behavior. This would provide an objective record of that behavior. It helps everyone." "It helps no one," she shot back. "Do you have any idea how intimidating it is for women to be under the constant surveillance of cameras? It's a tool of patriarchal control. It creates an atmosphere of oppressive observation." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "I thought the goal was to create an atmosphere where people feel safe from harassment," I said. "It is." "Well, I don't feel safe," I said. The words just came out. I don't feel safe when any accidental gesture, any poorly chosen word, can be anonymously reported and used to destroy my career without a shred of evidence. I want evidence. I want a camera to prove that I did nothing wrong. Gunnar was just staring at his desk, pretending to be invisible. Just then, the office door opened. It was Rick. He was holding a printout. "Sorry to interrupt, Gunnar," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Just needed you to look over these server specs." He walked in and noticed the tense situation. "Oh, am I interrupting something important?" he asked, feigning innocence. Ada glared at him. "This is a private HR matter." "It's about the camera proposal, isn't it?" Rick said, looking at me. I gave a slight nod. Rick leaned against the doorframe. "You know, it's funny," he said to Ada. "For weeks, you've been telling us that we need to listen to people when they tell you they feel unsafe, that their feelings are valid and need to be addressed." He gestured toward me. "Well, Finnegan just told you he feels unsafe. A lot of us do. And your first response is to tell him his feelings are wrong and his proposed solution is an act of aggression. It seems the believe all victims policy only applies to the victims you approve of." Ada was speechless. Her face was turning a blotchy red. She couldn't form a coherent argument against Rick's logic. He had used her own buzzwords against her. She just sputtered, This is completely unacceptable." She turned to Gunnar. "I expect you to handle this. This is a coordinated act of intimidation, and it needs to be shut down, now." She stormed out of the office, bumping Rick's shoulder on the way out. Rick just raised his eyebrows at me. Gunnar finally looked up from his desk. He looked miserable. "Look, Finnegan," he started, his voice weak. "I understand your concerns, but we can't just install cameras everywhere. There are privacy issues, and the budget." He was just making excuses. He was terrified of Ada. "So the answer is no?" I asked. "The request is denied," he said, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry." I stood up and walked out. Rick followed me. When we were back in the main office area, he clapped me on the shoulder. "Well done," he said. "You flushed her out. Now she's shown her hand." "What good does that do?" I asked, feeling defeated. Gunnar shot it down. "It's over." "No," Rick said, shaking his head. Phase 1 is over. Now comes Phase 2. The news of my failed proposal spread quickly. The mood among the men in the department was grim. It was confirmation of what we all suspected. The system was designed to be a one-way street. Accusations were welcome. Requests for objective proof were treated as hostile acts. That evening, I had quiet conversations with several of my male colleagues. The guy who got a warning for laughing, the senior engineer accused of gaslighting, others who hadn't been targeted yet but were living in fear. The feeling was unanimous. We couldn't let it stand. Rick's words echoed in my head. You don't fight the system on their terms. My individual request had failed because it could be dismissed as one disgruntled employee, but they couldn't dismiss all of us. We decided to draft a new letter, a collective one. This time, we didn't hold back. We worked on it together, after hours, in a shared document. We used stronger, more formal language. We described the current work environment as untenable and hostile. We detailed the specific incidents, the warnings for laughing, for having a technical debate, without using names, but the context was clear. We stated that the anonymous reporting system, without any mechanism for objective verification, had created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that was detrimental to productivity and professional collaboration. We reiterated our request for cameras, this time framing it not as a suggestion, but as a necessary remedial action to restore a fair and equitable working environment for all employees, regardless of gender. And then we added the most important part. We wrote that the company's refusal to implement such a reasonable, evidence-based solution, while simultaneously promoting a system of unverified accusations, could be construed as a form of workplace discrimination and created significant legal liability. We didn't explicitly threaten to sue. We didn't have to. The phrase legal liability was enough. The next morning, we had a final version. One by one, men from my department, and even a few from other departments, came over and quietly added their digital signature to the document. By the time we were done, we had signatures from nearly every male engineer in our building. This time, the email wasn't sent to Gunnar. It was sent directly to the Vice President of Operations at our corporate headquarters in another state. Gunnar and Ada were only on the CC line. We hit send. The effect was like dropping a bomb. For the rest of the day, there was a strange, tense silence in the office. Ada didn't leave her office once. Gunnar walked around looking pale and sweaty. They knew they had been bypassed. They had lost control of the situation. The next morning, we got our response. It was an email from the VP's executive assistant. It was brief and to the point. It said that our concerns were being taken very seriously and that a team from corporate, including a representative from the legal department, would be on site the following week to conduct a full review of the workplace environment. A wave of quiet relief washed over us. We had done it. We had kicked the hornet's nest, and now the people who actually owned the nest were coming to see what was wrong. The following Tuesday, they arrived. A man and a woman, both in sharp, expensive suits. They exuded an aura of calm, no-nonsense authority. The man was the head of corporate HR, and the woman was an in-house lawyer for the company. They set up in the main conference room. Ada was immediately summoned. She was in there for over 2 hours. We couldn't hear what was being said, but when she came out, her face was ashen. Then they started calling the rest of us in, one by one. They started with the men who had signed the letter. When it was my turn, I walked in and sat down. The lawyer had a notepad. The corporate HR guy just watched me. He asked me to explain, in my own words, what the problem was. I just told them the truth. I didn't use emotional language. I just laid out the facts, the training sessions, the anonymous complaints system, the specific incidents, the chilling effect it had on collaboration, the constant fear of false accusations. I told them about the incident where my arm brushed against a colleague and the anxiety that followed. The lawyer took meticulous notes. The HR guy asked, "So you don't feel safe here?" "No," I said, "but not for the reasons Ada thinks. I don't feel safe from her system." After they were done with the men, they started interviewing the women in the department. This was the part I was nervous about. I didn't know what they would say. But later I talked to one of the female engineers I was friendly with. She told me what she said in the interview. She told them that before Ada arrived, the office was great. She said she had never once felt threatened or disrespected by her male colleagues. But now, she said, the atmosphere was terrible. She told them that the men were afraid to talk to her, that nobody would challenge her ideas even when they were bad, and that she felt like she was being treated like a fragile piece of glass. "It's infantilizing," she told me she said to them. "I'm an engineer. I want to be treated like an engineer, not some damsel in distress who needs protection from a bad joke." She wasn't the only one. Many of the women apparently said similar things. The investigation lasted for 2 days. On the 3rd day, the final verdict came down. We didn't see it happen. There was no big announcement. Around lunchtime, we just saw Ada walking back to her office, followed by the 2 people from corporate. A few minutes later, she came out carrying a small cardboard box with her personal belongings. She didn't look at anyone. She just walked straight out the front door and never came back. An hour later, a company-wide email was sent from the corporate HR director. It was short and brutally concise. "As of today, Ada is no longer with the company. We wish her the best in her future endeavors." The email also announced a temporary suspension of the anonymous reporting policy, pending a full review. A quiet, collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the entire office. The next week, a team of contractors came in. They started installing small, dome-shaped security cameras in the corners of all the common areas and open-plan office spaces. Gunnar stood by and watched them, looking completely defeated. He knew he had backed the wrong horse and lost all respect from his team. The atmosphere began to return to normal almost immediately. People started talking again, joking, eating lunch together. The fear was gone. A couple of days after the cameras were fully operational, I was at my desk, deep in my code. Rick walked over and stood beside me, sipping his coffee. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked up at the small black dome on the ceiling above us. A tiny green light was glowing on it. "Well, you got what you wanted," he said, his voice laced with its usual irony. "Big Brother is watching you. Every move you make. You're on camera, forever." I didn't even look up from my monitor. "I know," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "And you know what? I've never felt safer."